Hi, this is the week 1 video. Sorry it's a little late in being posted. I've had some time to go back through and provide some examples based on the questions that students have been asking. And certainly a lot of the material that I've posted on the forums in response to students' questions will really help with your assessment. So I would suggest making sure that you look at all of those forums, because there's some great questions from some great students on there doing some great work in the course. So this week we're going to be talking about the competing values approach to management, and it's the CVF framework, the competing values framework, that we're going to have a look at. And it's a 4-quadrant model, a circular model, and that's what we're going to try and break down today for you. Alright, so let's get started, and let's start with the lecture slides. So we have an introduction to the 4 models that have an action imperative of collaborate, create, control and compete. And we're going to break down the yellow, green, red and blue areas of this model in the lecture that's to follow. Follows on from this now. Alright, so let's have a look at our agenda for today, what we actually want to cover. And we want to talk about things today about how we manage in a world of paradox. Paradox is an outcome, an illogical outcome, when you follow the facts blindly and don't allow for any creativity in your thinking about how to apply the knowledge that you've learnt from managing people. So we'll be breaking down paradox and trying to understand the paradox that is inherent in the models that you'll be looking at over the course. We're also going to have a look at a historical progression of management models and how management really started being sort of talked about, being thought about in the late 19th century. And then a Frenchman comes along, Henri Fayol, and he writes down what he thinks is important about management. And the really interesting thing about Fayol is he believed that management could be taught, and that management wasn't a necessary inbuilt skill that only some people had, that you could actually take management, write it down, teach it to people, and they would be more productive as managers and provide for better outcomes for staff. We're going to understand this framework of management through the CVF, the Competing Values Framework. And we've organised through the text learning methodology for this course, which is ALAPA. And you'll see information about that, which is down below this video. We're going to also talk about how we think critically about applying the core competencies that are necessary for you to be a great manager, and to have people who enjoy coming to work with you, and people who are enthusiastic and invigorated by your style and want to do the things that you want them to do. So we need to firstly understand how we manage in a world of paradox. I've put some information about paradox on the forum in reference to some great questions from students about trying to understand exactly what paradox means. And in the forum I've talked basically about how paradox can be an outcome that's illogical if you apply just the facts to the case and proceed with a blind devotion to looking at just the facts of the case. There is always paradox in a globalized world, in a changing world, where there's competing goals and competing values that you have to represent. You can't always be a great collaborative manager when you have to do planning, and planning has a deadline. It can't include everyone collaborating at once on what the outcome should be, or otherwise you'll never cut through and actually get your plan on the table, approved by senior management, so that you can go ahead and carry it out. So this step of transcending paradox and not getting caught up in saying, well, this model tells me that, and this model tells me that. What do? I don't know what to do. Maybe I'll just do nothing. That's the worst outcome for a manager. A manager must be always involved in trying to solve the problems and make employees understand why these goals are necessary at this particular point in time. So transcending means going beyond paradox. When you find a paradox, you don't drop your bundle and just say, look, none of this makes sense, I don't know which direction to go into. There's a bit of gut feeling that you have to have as a good manager to understand which is the way forward. And paradox is always there, so it's a lifelong learning process to become a great manager. You don't learn how to do something, let's say how to rebuild a carburetor, and then when you come to that in 20 years you go, oh, I've done this before, I know how to do this again. It's not that way with management. Each situation is slightly different from another, so it requires a completely different approach often. And with that in mind, it can frustrate some people who want to become managers and find that it is a very difficult situation. Something that worked last Wednesday might not work this Thursday, and that can be very frustrating for people learning how to do management well. So let's have a talk about how management as a discipline developed for us so that we can see what's happened in the past and have a historical perspective on what has occurred. So management models are a way of thinking about the world. They use facts, they use outcomes from the real world and apply it in a management model. And it's desired that the model gives direction for future managers who face situations similar to this. And models of management have changed over time as other things have become important and as we learn more about ourselves as human beings. Psychology, psychoanalysis, a big part of the latter part of the 19th century, going into the 20th century, that has increased our understanding of human beings. Psychology is a very important discipline that is part of management, and you must understand how human beings think, how human beings then act, and once you do that, you have a better understanding of predicting future outcomes. So these models are sometimes built on what we understand from psychology and a whole range of other disciplines about how the human brain works to make decisions. Sometimes old models can be reinvigorated. Those models can be applied to new situations and found to provide excellent solutions. So sometimes you'll see in management everything old is new again, that these older models that are thought did not apply can apply. So what we need to understand is how management models help us become more effective at our jobs as managers, being able to get people to do what we want and to do it happily and to do it with a sense of motivation and a sense of pride and quality outcomes being their focus. And we also need to understand what makes us less effective managers. Let's say, a temper tantrum in the workplace when people aren't following or people are seen to be not following the manager's directions. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Well, in some situations it's probably a bad thing, but in other situations it might motivate people to do a better job, to understand the goals and outcomes of that particular manager, and maybe reinvigorating. It's hard to say. Generally a temper tantrum's not a good idea, but I have seen it work. A curious thing. So this is part of paradox, this is part of transcending paradox as a good manager, and part of being strategic as a good manager and making great decisions. Alright, let's have a look at the foundational management models. These are models that have really made a big impact on the discipline. And they start really around 1900, 1925, when people start looking at management. Henry Fayol wrote down what a manager does on a daily basis, and also believed that management could be taught. And he revolutionized the discipline and really helped us to understand that managers needed to be aware of a lot of different things, a lot of competing values at the same time, and produce great outcomes. So the rational goal model and the internal process model, they really get their start between 1900 and 1925. Then in 1926 to 1950, you have the human relations model come along, with a number of thinkers in this particular area. Mary Parker Follett is really important in this particular area. The open systems model in 1951 to 1975, where work really starts to change. Bureaucracies become really important. Organizations like IBM start to grow and be seen as best practice in management. 1976 to 1999, you have both and assumptions being applied to management, and you have the development of the model that we're primarily concerned with, the competing values framework. And then we have 2000 to today, where using and applying the CVF to cope with complexity, ambiguity and paradox is a really important tool to help us understand how to do our jobs as managers in a better way. So let's talk about these models individually now. Firstly, we're going to have a look at the human relations model in detail. So the human relations model, it's the top left-hand quadrant of the CVF framework in your text. And its criteria for effectiveness, what it considers an effective outcome for a management environment to be, is an environment that espouses or uses commitment and cohesion. So commitment and cohesion is a really important outcome, a really important environment to create with the human relations model, where people are committed to your ideas as a manager, agree with your goals and are happy to pursue them, and they're cohesive, they care about each other. All the subordinates in the team have a caring approach to ensure that the outcomes are achieved and that people are happy and healthy and well in doing that, and there is a real eye on other team members. Means ends theory. Well, means ends theory is really looking at the end product and the goal, the final goal where you want to go, and then backtracking and thinking, how can I achieve that strategic end? So the means to get to the end is really involvement results in commitment. So there's a lot of consultation with the human relations model. There's a lot of communication happening, a lot of communication up through the organization from subordinates to managers and back down from managers to subordinates. So there's lots of team meetings, lots of face-to-face work, lots of use of Skype technology, lots of interaction. People will probably get together on social occasions in this model outside of work, and they're really involved and they are committed. The action imperatives, so what do you have to do as a manager? Well, at all times you're trying to create collaboration. You're trying to get people to work with each other, to enjoy that process. You're making linkages, you're introducing people to each other, you're reinforcing outcomes through collaboration. And the emphasis is on participation, conflict resolution, and consensus building. So you really want to make sure that people deal effectively with conflict, which is inevitable with every model that we're going to look at. But we want to make sure here particularly that conflict is resolved in a healthy, positive way that contributes to collaboration and consensus building. And participation is really, really important. People are encouraged to participate. People's ideas are shared, they're valued. That's the type of emphasis you have in the human relations model. So culture and clan are really, really important to this. Developing a culture of clanship where people work together, people are aware of each other, they respect each other, and they respect each other's contribution. All right, let's have a look at the internal process model. Some ways very different, probably completely opposite to the human relations model. Its criteria of effectiveness is about creating stability and continuity. This is an organization that uses the internal process model. They will value stability and continuity. Conservative values are probably shared amongst a lot of the people in this particular organization. Where stability, the way we've done things in the past, has been successful, let's try that again. Continuity with the past is important. Radical changes are not something you're going to find recommended by a manager when using the internal process model. So means ends theory, again, what is the end and what is the means to getting towards that end? And you do that by thinking about the end first. So the end is about routinization leading to stability. You want to really make sure that everyone understands how things are done in your organization. You want to have a keen promotion of routine. Probably you're going to have set start times for work, finish times. People are going to appreciate the stability that comes from that, the reliability that comes from that, and routine is going to be really important. Maybe they have clients and customers, maybe they're in shipping, and routine is really important. It saves a lot of money in shipping when you have the human resources combined with the capital equipment to unload and load ships quickly. So routine is very, very important to some organizations and industries. So it's action imperative. What's the main thing that you're always trying to do with this particular process, with this model? It's about control. A good manager is in control. They know what is happening. They can tell you where employee A is, what employee A is doing. They have good control over the human resources or human capital of the organization, and they enjoy knowing about the organization, where it's headed. There's a high degree of planning involved in the internal process model as well. Its emphasis is on defining responsibility, saying these are your sets of responsibilities. You have to make sure that when that ship is docked, that it is tied appropriately to the wharf so it doesn't drift away from the wharf, that it is loaded on time, that it is monitored, that the ship, which costs millions of dollars often to come into port, is handled effectively and efficiently, that the customer is happy, the shipping company is happy, that you've done a great job. And the emphasis is really on putting responsibility on certain areas of the organization to make sure that ship is turned around in the quickest time possible. Emphasis is on measurement. You want to be able to measure success. How many hours was that ship docked? How much less was that than last year when that ship visited? Are you getting better at turning around ships in port and providing efficiency, or are you getting worse? There's a lot of documentation in the internal process model to record all of this control so that this control can occur more often and lead to a great outcome for clients so that they keep visiting your port instead of going to other ports around the world. And the culture here is one of really hierarchy. So there is very much a structure in place. You will know that there are certain senior managers, mid-level managers, subordinates in the organization. You might even be able to tell these people through their uniforms, and that can be important in reinforcing a hierarchy. So on to the rational goal model next. Rational goal model, its criteria of effectiveness is productivity and profitability. They are organizations that have this approach from time to time are very involved with looking at profitability and making sure that performance is measured, that competition is part of everyday planning, that they're aware of what their competition is doing, and that they want to produce best practice, copy what's necessary from the competition, and be original where necessary in order to create great outcomes so customers keep coming back and they can remain profitable. Means ends theory. So looking at the ends here, well, clear direction is really important in the rational goal model, and it leads to productive outcomes. So managers using this model of thought will put a lot of emphasis on how they communicate direction, goals, outcomes. and make sure that they're productive in the process. So making sure that projects are completed. In these organizations or these models, you'll see managers celebrate success. They will put an end or a full stop by celebrating the outcome and saying this was good. That's of course if it was positive. They will also provide feedback on if there was a negative outcome from a set of goals that were put together. The action imperative is to compete. So originality, ideas are encouraged. Competition is the main focus. Being successful, being seen to be top of the pile is very important in the rational goal model. Its emphasis is on goal clarification, rational decision making, rational understanding of the variables in the managerial environment, and taking action where necessary to respond to the managerial environment that you find yourself in. It's culture of the market. So the market dominates. The market and the messages that the market sends to managers about their products and services are highly valued in this model. Finally, we go to the open systems model, and its criteria of effectiveness is change and adaptability. They understand that to be sustainable, it's very important that change and adaptability to be built in to their management planning and how they go about defining the goals that are necessary at this particular point in time. The people who work in an open systems model would have to be flexible. They couldn't doggedly stick to existing or old model thinking. New changes happen all the time in the business environment that we're in today, so they're quite aware that they might have to change direction very quickly, that flexibility is a really, really important element of working successfully in the open systems model. So the ends theory here, what you have an eye on and then developing your strategy to achieve that, is continual adaptation and innovation. New ideas are encouraged, new ways of doing things, cheaper ways of doing things. If you know about it, tell a senior manager. They'll be grateful for the information. You'll be rewarded. It's about acquiring and maintaining external resources and having control over those resources and making them work in a changeable management environment. Its action imperative is about creation, coming up with new ideas, coming up with new ways to do things, being at the forefront of the way that business is performing, not looking in your own backyard to gain ideas about what you should do in your organization. You have a global focus in the open systems model. You're taking ideas from managers in Thailand and China and the USA and Europe, and you're using those and applying those and making sure that those creative ideas are working successfully. Its emphasis is on political adaptation. You might find that there are a lot of moving chairs at the top of the organization. As people adapt, they become less relevant to the organization and they may move on. Other managers may be put in place. They like creative problem solving. So if you walked into an open systems model office, you probably wouldn't see an environment that you see every day. Maybe it's like Google, where you have beanbags and a breakfast station where you can prepare 17 different types of cereal for your breakfast, and you're encouraged to have breakfast at work. Maybe there's pool tables and ping pong tables where people can get together from different teams, where engineers can play with managers and customer service people, so that they cross-fertilize their ideas and understand how customers think if they're engineers developing new products. So it's about solving, innovation, and change management. Those things are going to be represented in the architecture of the firm. And its culture is adhocracy. So it's really going to be a place where you don't have a defined system or hierarchy of management. You're not going to, perhaps you're dressed in casual clothes, and the CEO is also dressed in casual clothes in this workplace. And there is not such an importance on people being the boss and people being in charge of outcomes. It's more a environment where the one person who comes, or the team that comes up with the best idea, is going to be rewarded. So that's a bit like what an adhocracy is, rewarding great new ideas. So, core assumption of the competing values framework. Well, effective managers and organizations must simultaneously embrace and the apparently competing values associated with all four of these foundational management models. You can see conflict arising from the last four slides that I spoke about. The manager, he or she, is probably has their own style and would find it hard to develop in some of the other models. Well, that's not the thinking that we're trying to use here. We're not saying you have a default position and then you have to move out into these other areas. We're saying you have to have the flexibility to call on all four areas at any particular time as a good manager, and use the theories, use the thinking, use the imperatives of those models to create great outcomes. So effective managers are flexible and move between the four. Alright, so there are dimensions underlying the competing values framework. If you imagine a vertical line travelling up through the circle, you're going to see that there's more flexibility at the top of the circle than at the bottom of the circle. There's more control at the bottom of the circle with the two models that are lower down. They're going to have more of a focus on control. Left to right as well. So left, we have an internal looking focus where it's inward. To the right, we have an external, outward looking focus into the management environment. You need to understand that the model is pictorially represented this way on purpose to present these kinds of axes, a north-south and east-west axes, looking at flexibility and control and internal and external focus. So master managers then have to have a high degree of flexibility, and that comes from cognitive complexity. So you're able to appreciate the values and weaknesses of each of the four fundamental management models. You've got to critically evaluate them. You've got to say, well, this is good in this environment and this is good in that environment. You have to have a gut feeling for how to apply these models, and the competencies or the activities that we get you to develop over the course by looking into yourself, looking into your environment, will help you develop that cognitive complexity. So keep making sure you're doing those assigned activities each week. Behavioral complexity is really important to understand. You have to have a sensitivity or a gut feeling about behavioral complexity of an organization. You must acquire and use multiple competencies associated with each model, and dynamically integrate these competencies into your thinking and your situation. So that dynamic is a really important word there. You have to be active. You have to be thinking about problems. If this is not working the way I'm approaching it, I need to change my thinking and adapt and use one of the other models. And that behavioral complexity, so maybe people analysing your behaviour will think, wow, that's very different to how he did that last week or she did that last week. This is a very different approach, and you have to be able to have that complexity in your management style. So we repeat the action imperatives that we've talked about in those slides. Those earlier slides featured in slide 6 and ending in slide 9. So we repeat: collaboration for the human relations model, creativity for the open systems, competition for the rational goal, and control as the main focus for the internal process model. Alright, so managerial competencies. So you've got to be able to, in the human relations model, have that collaboration imperative. And that means understanding yourself and others, understanding how you work, understanding and having insight into how other people like to be treated at work and what's important to them. Communicating honestly and effectively. As soon as you know something, you're going to pass it on. That's the real key to collaboration. Only certain, very small amount of information that's confidential and can't be shared with subordinates. And that should be a very, very small percentage of the information and data that you handle. Mentoring and developing others is important. You want to care about other people. You want to care about their career progression. You want to make sure that they're enjoying their work, and if they're not enjoying their work, how that can be changed. Managing groups and leading teams. You have to have this empathy for knowing how teams work and how groups work and how to get the best from them. So you've got to understand what it's like to be in their shoes if you're going to produce great results. And you've got to manage and encourage conflict and sometimes bring conflict out. You've got to bring it to the surface so it can be dealt with positively and that people can continue this atmosphere of collaboration, which is so essential to this model. So the managerial competencies associated with the internal process model, you've got to be good at organising information flows. You've got to know who needs the information, how to get it to them in a timely way, how to have it digested easily. You've got to know how to work and manage across different functions, how to manage the flows of information from very disparate areas of the organisation and make sure that people are getting the information that they need. Consequently, you have to know how to get the information you need to do your job well. Planning and coordinating projects, there'll be a big focus on planning. Measuring and monitoring performance and quality will be important. You'll sit down with your manager, they'll talk to you about your performance, they'll record it, they will get you to sign to say that you agree with the assessment. There'll be a lot of paperwork, there'll be a lot of recording of information so that it can be brought back and reassessed. And they'll encourage people to comply with systems so that if you are in compliance with the system, that will be seen as a very favourable thing. Or managerial competencies. I just clicked back a couple of slides there, apologies for that. Managerial competencies, you need to develop and communicate a vision. Being a good leader here is essential, and leadership and being a good leader is one of the 4 functions of management. You'll see those from the course profiles and the learning objectives. Setting goals and objectives will be important. Being able to motivate others to see your vision and to want to follow you in that direction and to produce quality along the way will be really important. Designing and organising systems will be important in this rational goal model, and managing execution and driving for results will be so important to achieve those great outcomes that will come from being a good rational goal model manager. Alright, managerial competencies with the open systems. You've got to use power ethically and effectively. You've got to champion new ideas. You've got to stand up in front of your team and say, look, Margaret had a great idea today. She thought that if we do things this way and change that and incorporate this new person into the team, we can make some savings. We can produce great outcomes and better quality outcomes, and we won't miss milestones like we have in the past. Well done, Margaret. And you get Margaret to stand up and you get the rest of the team to give her a round of applause. So you're encouraging all the time these new ideas. Fueling and fostering innovation will be important. You'll have an eye on what is up to date, what is current. You'll be informed of that. You'll have systems and networks to allow you to gain access to that information. You'll negotiate agreement and commitment from people, and you'll implement and want to sustain change as an ongoing strategic objective in the open systems model. So organising the learning process is going to be really important in this course, and I just want to spend a little time talking about the ALAPA model, which is made up of these acronyms: Assessment, Learning, Analysis, Practice and Application. And you'll find these in each of the modules in the text. The text is essential to purchase. You will not pass the course unless you have access to the text, and you will find these headings at appropriate points in the text to develop your competencies. So thinking critically, that's what we have to do in Module 1. And there are grounds and warrants and claims which you will develop as a competency going through the chapter and the readings this week. So make sure that you spend some time on that, have a look on the forums what other students have to say about grounds, warrants and claims, and make sure that you understand argumentation and how this occurs. So just a final recap, how is the CVF computing values framework similar to earlier management models? Well, it incorporates those earlier management models. It looks at things like Frederick Taylor's scientific management and incorporates those. It takes the work of Mary Parker Follett and brings those into the CVF framework. So have a look at those authors, Frederick Taylor, Mary Parker Follett. Find out who they are, do a Google search, find out why they were important in management. Maybe you can incorporate these authors into your assessment. What are the two underlying dimensions of the CVF? Well, it's really important that you understand those underlying dimensions of each of the components. You have to understand flexibility, you have to understand control, you have to understand an internal focus and an external focus. You have to understand all the action imperatives from the four models. Make sure you know that collaboration is attached to the human relations model. How do action imperatives differ from competencies? Well, your competencies are your ability to carry out those action imperatives with other people. All right, that's the end of week 1. I hope you found the lecture informative. If you've got any questions, please post them on the forum, or give me a phone call, or send me an email and we'll clarify those. All right, good luck. Take care, and we'll be back with week 2. All right, bye-bye.